Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. All praise belongs to Allah, Lord of the worlds. Blessings and salutations on the noblest of prophets and messengers, our leader Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and on his family and on his companions. Jazakumullah khair for joining us. Welcome back from break. We're going to continue inshallah with a series we're doing, the Prophetic Code. And we'll have today's class, and then inshallah I have on my calendar scheduled for next week as well, but that will be the end of the semester in terms of classes, and we'll go into reading week at that point. And so we'll gauge interest next week to see if people want to continue into reading week, and if not, I totally understand, because you have to prepare for your exams and finish papers and whatnot, and then we'll just pause and then inshallah continue. This is obviously a long class, alhamdulillah, and we'll continue into next semester inshallah. So we'll take a hiatus in the middle, but picking up where we left off last week, and I will say that we are now in the blessed month of Rabi'ul Awwal, which is the the month that historically we have documentation. This is the month in which the blessed Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was born, and it's also the month of the death date of Rasulullah ﷺ. So there is some scholarly difference of opinion on the exact birth date of the Prophet ﷺ, and there are valid differences upon that. We know that it's somewhere in the early to beginning to middle part of the month, but we know that the Prophet ﷺ's death date is recorded as the 12th of Rabi'ul Awwal. And so this is a month in which traditionally, historically, the Ummah would always reconnect its hearts and minds with the seerah of the noble Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and part of that was through individually and collectively people reading the seerah. So my encouragement now to all of you is that in this special month is, and I can talk more about this either at the end or offline, privately, if people want. I've mentioned this many times. It's on my website as well. What some of the best English language seerahs that are available, both in audio and text format, that I recommend, and they're extraordinary sources. And there's no better time, like in the blessings of the month of Rabi'ul Awwal, to commit yourself. And so what I would encourage you, if you want to be people of himmah, and we are people traditionally, our cultures and our civilization has been one of high himmah, people of great aspirations. We're not a culture, we haven't historically been a civilization that's encouraged mediocrity. It's always encouraged excellence and leadership, spiritual leadership, as well as communal leadership. And so my point being is that I would encourage you, if you have high himmah, to try to go through one seerah. Even if it's short, try to from beginning to end read one book of seerah or listen through one seerah series in this month. And you'll find profound benefits from it, inshallah. And it's also a blessing for us that we're covering the Prophetic Code into this month as well, because we've been talking about this for the last few weeks, and inshallah we find ourselves in this special month talking about it as well. And so we're going to pick up where we left off. We were talking about the eating of the Rasulullah ﷺ, and I'm going to jump right into it where we were before. We had ended, I think we're in this portion right here. The Prophet ﷺ never expressed dislike of a food. If he liked it, he ate it. If he disliked it, he set it aside. And the Prophet ﷺ said also, if any of you drops any morsels, he should pick it up, clean it, and eat it, and do not leave any food for shaitan. The comment I want to make before we continue on that is, this, and I spoke about this last week, so I'm only very briefly going to comment on it again, is, this may seem for some of us like a daily mundane activity, but in fact, it speaks to a much larger mindset, right? And so last week, I spoke in great detail about the idea of mindfulness. And we live in a time in which this has become really a popularized term. And for us, the idea of adab is spiritual mindfulness. And so, mashallah, it's wonderful now that different traditions and philosophies and people that talk about wellness are talking about mindfulness. But for us, the very notion of the last 1400 years of the idea of having adab is having a sense of spiritual mindfulness. So it's not a novel concept for us at all. In fact, this is the very heart of our deen, right? And I'm not going to reiterate what we already covered, but that's what we've been talking about for the last 2 months. Is that Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawzi said that deen is about adab and akhlaq. The word used is akhlaq. Whoever has better akhlaq than you has a better deen than you. It's that simple. And if you have bad akhlaq, that means your deen is bad. But if you have good akhlaq, it means your deen is good. It's healthy. It's sound. It's beneficial, right? It's inshallah, it's good for you in that sense. It's felicitous. And so what I mean to say with this is that when we look at this beautiful and deep hadith, he never expressed dislike of a food. If he liked it, he ate it. If he disliked it, he set it aside. And the takeaway from this before we go on is to understand That's the attitude of a believer, or mu'min or mu'minah in life. There are things that you will find, people and places and circumstances that we will find pleasing. And if you like it, benefit from it, partake from it, begin in the name of Allah and show gratitude to Allah, say do shukr to Allah when you're finished with it, alhamdulillah, and then you go on with your life. And if you find yourself in a situation that's less than desirable, let's say, it's something that you don't care for, something that you don't like, whether it's food, whether it's a situation, whether it's a person or a place or something like that, instead of, I mean, look, there's times and places in which you have to speak out, that you have to redress wrongs, right? Someone is causing fitna, someone has to intervene, right? And so, there's fitna in a system, in a society, in a community, and whatever. Someone has to redress those kinds of wrongs. But I'm saying the mindset generally for the believer, the mu'min and mu'minah, is that they dislike something, they set it aside, they leave it alone, right? If there's groups of people that you don't care for, there's nothing saying you have to be there with those people. You can, in fact, you should set yourself apart and find better company, right? And there's a saying that our teachers have taught us, and I've mentioned this before, but it's very relevant right now as well, is that when we talk about the idea of, you know, good company is better than solitude, but it's said that solitude is better than bad company. And even in this, there's so much to unpack because there's such wisdom in this. Good company, good suhbah, good companionship is better than solitude. But solitude, I mean, everybody loves that part, right? The next part is where the rub is. Solitude is better than bad company. You're better off alone. It's less harm to you psychologically, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally to be alone and to understand the deep wisdom of solitude than it is to be in bad company, in irreligious, wretched company. Now, we as a society can't stand solitude. And there's many examples that we can talk about that. I'll give you two quick examples. And these are meant to be like personal, rhetorical questions, right? Think about this for yourself. What is the first thing that the vast majority of people do when they get in the car? If you're by yourself. Most people instinctively reach for the radio. The radio's like, Purana Zamana, they say, right? That's old news, right? Now people have their like iPhone and they have their auxiliary cable, or they just stream it, to their car on their Bluetooth or whatever. And they have to have something. Typically they're playing music or listening to streaming audio or whatever, right? Why? People cannot stand to be alone. Study after study after study has shown that for our society today, being alone, for some people to the point, it makes them anxious. Right? It's what we call uncomfortable silences, like in a conversation when you're with someone. You feel like someone has to say something to fill the dead time, right? The dead zone there. Because we're not comfortable as a community, as a society, with being present with ourselves. What does that say? Really, what does that say about us? Forget out there. What does it say about you? I want you to think about what is the first thing that you instinctually do when you get in a car or when you get home to your room, right? People they're in their room by themselves, their roommate's not there, their suite mate's not there, presuming you're not eating or sleeping or something like that. You're just in your room. And then people need to fill the silence. Why? Because they're not comfortable being with themselves. And this has many layers to it. Because they just don't know themselves. It's part of it. Or they're unhappy with themselves. They don't want to think of who they are and how you feel silence, right? The other thing is, if you look at so much of our downtime, think about this. This is a human experiment, right? Human observation. Look at when you're waiting in line for something. You're waiting in line to get for people that ride the bus, your bus tickets. You're waiting, or get on the bus, you're waiting in line, with the bank teller, or whatever it is, any queue that you have to line up to. People won't engage with each other. They won't even make chit-chat or small talk. Dare I say a number, 9 out of 10 people will immediately pull up their phone, check their email, or go on social media. Rather than having a brief it's understood you're not going to have a deep, meaningful conversation or connection with that person for the 3 minutes you're waiting in line. Rather than having that conversation or interaction with someone, people would rather go, and you're in this atomized, narcissistic, self-referential life. That's your Instagram feed, that's your Facebook news feed, or I don't know how many people are on Twitter here, but having to tweet about inane, useless things about that, like random thoughts that go through their heads. Why? What does that say about us as people, right? And this is for our own reflection. We're all guilty of it to some degree or another. But I'm putting it out there for us to think about and for us to not be people in that situation, right? And so, like I said, all of the stems, or you can see the tributaries of these kinds of reflections and ideas from these things of how we're just not comfortable, being alone. And we, rather than being alone, we'd end up putting ourselves or feeling that we need to, right? That's why I have an expression about it. It's called FOMO. People would literally, rather than just be with themselves, something's going on that I'm missing. What, I can't be alone on a Friday night. Like, I can't be alone, like, etc. whatever time it is. There's a pathology there. Like, we joke about FOMO, but these things have real consequences. Partly it is comical, but what does that say about you as a person? You're either unhappy with being with people or in places that are beneficial to you, or by being by yourself. You would rather go to a place or to a situation. Do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the hierarchy between like good company, solitude, and bad company, is the point of that we should be more comfortable with solitude, or that it's okay to not like solitude, but we should chase good company?
No, it's a very good question. I think it's a very deep question, mashallah. What I would say, I think it's that one should always aspire for good company, because there's benefits, right? I'll mention the hadith. I think I mentioned it. Someone I was in the conversation with recently, with the hadith came up in our conversation. It's beautifully put, articulated by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which he said, good company is like a perfume seller. That when you're in the perfume shop of the perfume seller, that just the ambiance, right, of that, just the fragrance in the atmosphere and the environment is going to be beneficial. It's pleasing for you to smell and to be in that space. And if you're able to, you would get some fragrance, right? You'd get some oil and you'd apply it, and then you've transferred it, right, so to speak. The goodness from that person, from that company, from that environment, right, to those people, to yourself. And when you leave that perfume shop, either your clothes will still smell well, they'll smell nice and fragrant, right, and appealing for a time after you leave, just from being in that environment, or you'll actually have put some on and it'll have a lasting effect, a longer lasting effect. That's the benefit of good company, is that when you're with good people, and the Prophet told us the signs of good people, right? One of which is that when you're with the mu'min or mu'minah, you're with the believing man or the believing woman, they're people that remind you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That just being in their company brings you into a state of awareness, right? And that you're reminded of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the sense of you're thinking about khair, you're thinking about goodness, you're thinking about amr bin ma'ruf, enjoining the good, or people are enjoining the good, even if they're not doing it to you directly. Being in their presence, there's a subconscious effect that it has on you, right? That your heart is inclining towards goodness, good speech, good manners, good behavior, good thoughts, right? And then what did the Prophet say at the end of that hadith? He said, bad company is like what? Does anyone know the hadith? Who wants to say it? Bad company is the blacksmith, the one that blows, right, into the heat of the fire. The blacksmith shop is what? If you've ever been in a blacksmith shop, presumably in the old country, I mean, we don't have them. If you grew up here, it's kind of like something you read in a storybook, right? But a blacksmith shop, if you've been in a blacksmith shop, it's a hard, harsh environment, right? Literally full of fire and steel and pounding and ashes and sparks and soot. Look at what a beautiful example the Prophet is saying is that's bad company. If you've ever been in a blacksmith shop, which is, let's just say for our purposes, full of smoke, toxic smoke, coming out of the fire and the sparks, at the very least, when you're there, that odor and that smoke is going to permeate your clothes and your hair and your garments. And when you leave, for a time thereafter, people are going to be able to know that you were in that kind of place, right? I mean, I hope people go camping here. It's like a lost art amongst Muslims now. But if you've been camping, right, there's like, you're around a campfire, and then when you leave the campfire, you have that woodsy smokiness in your clothes, right, which has its own appeal at the time. But now, after a while it gets stale, and it's not a pleasant odor anymore. Or if you happen to be, not that I would ever encourage this, around people that are smoking, right, And then just the secondhand effect. I mean, now there's all these studies, right, that show the toxic carcinogens that are in secondhand smoke, and you're getting it on your clothes, you're inhaling it, you're getting it in your hair, and all this kind of stuff, and that there's a residual malodor, right? But what does the Prophet say beyond that? If you spend too long in a blacksmith shop, what's the chance? The probability is that some of the sparks or the fire from the flames are going to burn you. And that's the disastrous effect, an inevitable effect of spending too much time in bad company, is that it will affect you, whether you know it or not, right? If you spend too long there, you're going to get burned. So you see they're opposite ends, right? So to go back to the question that you were asking, is that optimally, ideally, aspirationally, you want to spend time in good company. But obviously we have lives, right? I mean, you're in lab, you're at the office, you're in the library, you're studying, you're whatever, right? You don't have, the nature of life is that you're not going to be amongst like the Salihin for the vast majority of us, like day and night, right? Although I would say aspire to surround yourself with like that. That's how the kind of people you want as your roommates, as your suite mates, as your neighbors, as your spouses, as your friends that you eat with on a regular basis. It's doable, right? But let's say you can't have that every day, right? Solitude is better than being in bad company. And so look, I mean, you have to look at the way it applies to your life. Like, I just want you to imagine when you have downtime and free time, how are you filling that up, right? It's not that every day, you know, for most of us, not every day we're going to end up in the musalla or the masjid or wherever, like, you know, on a Friday night, etc., as much as we'd like to. But then you think about, well, how am I using my free time, right? On my break or etc., etc. If that makes sense, right? Just keep that in mind, because what happens is, like I said, I went off on a tangent, but it was an important tangent, related tangent to this, of the idea of the mindset that people have. There's people that are just, you can present anything to them and they'll find something to complain about. They'll find something to whine about, right? And how is, like, why would you want to be in the world in that way, right? Look through the eyes, like the eyes that you look through the world, that should be eyes of like seeking the splendor and the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His creation, right? Versus like looking with an eye of disdain, of criticism, of unhappiness, of like misery. There's no doubt we have people that are very deep. I mean, look, it's one thing to be traumatized inside, right? That's not, I'm not talking about that conversation. There's people that have been deeply traumatized emotionally, psychologically, physically, and that when they look at the world and they engage with the world, that's a different conversation. I'm saying for the most of the rest of us, right? It's just that you're just looking about criticizing and wanting more and more and more. You know, there's a word in Arabic, we talked about it before, but we'll talk about it again. It's actually, subhanAllah, it relates to the idea of eating. Tama. Tama in Arabic means covetousness. Look at even the word tama. It's a harsh word, it's a strong word, right? The idea is that there's a hollowness inside. You know, there's people that are emotional eaters. I'm not knocking anyone like this. I myself have bouts of emotional eating, okay? It's that you're trying to deal with your feelings. You're sad, you're unhappy, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're anxious, you're stressed about the world. And so like ice cream like just does it for you or whatever, right? It's because there's something that you're trying to like feed a void. And I get that, I'm not knocking it, right? What I'm saying is if that becomes a state of being, that you're always hollow and full of a void inside, right? And that's what you're not projecting goodness or looking at goodness in the world. It's always like, these people don't do this for me. This isn't good enough. These people aren't woke enough. These people aren't getting the job done. Why hasn't the system changed? Why haven't we should have had this done yesterday. Why isn't it done? Look, there's a time and place when you have deadlines. But if everything that you look at the world through is just that, like, what a sad state to be in for ourselves, let alone for other people, for those times when we're just like, I don't know why I'm so mad and angry and frustrated all the time. And like, I'm going to take out on other people, right? And I'm going to criticize other things because there's a hollowness inside. And the takeaway from this before we go to the next slide, I hope you've seen how this is related to like something that we do literally 3-4 times a day to eat, right? On how you can draw, you know, inshallah, levels of understanding from this is what? Is that our spiritual tradition teaches us. What does Allah Ta'ala say in the Quran? Verily, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find contentment. Your heart will never find true satisfaction and contentment except in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at one level, the dhikr of Allah is obviously reading the Quran Hakim, reading the book of Allah, doing the dhikr of Allah, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah, saying salat an nabi, durood sharif. These things have profound spiritual effects. It's our problem that we hang out with materialists, right? And atheists far too often too much for our own good, that we begin to think that these things have no power, that they're just meaningless. That's to our detriment, because this is haqiqah from our perspective of deen, is that these things have profound power. When the Sahaba were sick, they would recite Quran and make dhikr, and it would physically remove their illnesses, and it would improve their states, right? Now, obviously, we have, knowledge, and we have sciences, right, that also help us to cure our physical illnesses and whatnot, and psychological illnesses. I absolutely am telling you, if you have a mental health concern, you take care of, get it dealt with by a mental health specialist. If you have a physical illness, you go and you see a doctor, right, to take care of that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying is that for us, there is also a profound power in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One, at a material, physical level, but for us, it's even beyond that. The real power, so to speak, of it is what it does to the sakina, the tranquility and the serenity that it brings to the heart. And this is why, I'm sure you've seen this, or you've heard your, ammus and khalas and your jiddus, your grandparents talk about these stories. There are people, you can look at them. I've seen a few people like this in my own life, I would just say. You look at them on the outside of their life, and your heart, if your heart is alive, feels pity. You're like this miskeen person, poor person, right? Their situation, physically, financially, they've lost people, they themselves have been traumatized and tortured, they've been driven from their homes, they're refugees, any number of things. They've seen and lived through horrors that, like, you hear about in the news, and these people have lived through that, right? That's their circumstance. You look at them and you're just like, your heart just feels like, you feel so bad for these people. But then if you get to know those people, these are people that have such sakina inside, such tranquility inside, it takes your breath away. You're like, how could you be in that and still have such a connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And every other word out of your mouth is alhamdulillah, right? Because that's the connection they have with their Lord, irrespective of what's going on out here. And it's not that out here is not going to affect you. It will affect you. That's the nature of out here. But this becomes so strong that it overpowers and transcends what's going on out here in the physical. We're human beings. You're going to have good days and bad days. You're going to have moments of, like, the brokenness that you feel. But there's a rebound, because there's a resilience that you develop, right, to get through that. And the converse is what? I don't know if you've seen people like this. There's people, you look at their life, they have everything. I mean, they have the money, they have the looks, they have the car, they have the social status, they have the Instagram followers, whatever you want to call it. Like, their lives are just like totally curated, picture perfect, amazing lives. They have the perfect marriage, the perfect parents, the perfect car, the perfect job, the perfect degree, and all of that. And you spend time with people, and they're deeply emotionally broken, troubled people. And we know from our society what happens with that is that most people like that have that internal brokenness and vacuity, they're vacuous, hollow people inside, their substance abuse is rampant in that. Sexual addiction, substance abuse, sexual harassment. Like, need I say more other than follow the headlines of the rich and powerful, right, people, whether they're Hollywood celebrities or whether they're politicians in our time right now, people that have platforms that 99% of the world dreams about having that platform. And you look at how wretched some of their lives are with, like, when now these things are being unveiled, right, and being exposed and coming out, right? But if there's people you've ever been like that, and they're just like, they can have the best car, the best degree, they can be handsome, beautiful, comely, attractive people. Not that there aren't people like that that are well adjusted as well, but I'm saying some of the ones, they're deep, I mean, these are people that are like borderline suicidal, and then you look at your life and you're like, ajib. Like, what don't you have? What is it that you don't have that all of us, most of us, right, are like killing ourselves for? That's why people they're working 70 hours work weeks, and like iBanking and private equity and Wall Street and God knows what to make that dunya. And then these people have the dunya, and they're sad, depressed, substance abusing people. And you're like, that kid that I just graduated from Yale last year is putting in 70 hours a week. He wants to be like you. He should be looking at you being like, na'udhu billah, God forbid, I don't want to end up like that. No, I'm not saying you can't be high-performing, powerful, intelligent, successful, and all of that. You can very much do that. But for us, you know, if this is solid inside, and you have that, that's like unstoppable, right? On one sense, because there's people that don't have that have this inside, that are also unstoppable. I'm not saying it's either or, they're not mutually exclusive. But I'm saying for us, this is what the dunya is. There's many hadith that talk about this. I won't talk about it right now, except to say, you know, the way the dunya is described in some hadith, it really takes your breath away, right? The dunya is made to look very seductive and alluring by shaitan. Because in that way, we're human, we have nafs. And the nafs is inclined to things. The nafs likes good things. It likes good cars and good clothes and good food and fancy vacations and that kind of stuff. That's the way the nafs is hardwired. But the point for us is the nafs is like a child. It's like a baby. And a baby, when it wants to eat, will cry if it's hungry. When the baby wants to sleep and it can't sleep, will cry endlessly until it's pacified. That's the word, until it's pacified. And some people, their nafs is like that. They will cry and cry and cry, in that they will consume and make a ruckus and make noise and be agitated and agitate the people around them until they're pacified, until you stick that like spoonful of like, you know, sugar in their mouth, right? Which is itself poison, which is what the dunya is in that sense, right? But in that moment, it's, you've got that hit, right? You've got that dopamine release. I check my Twitter, how many times have I been retweeted? Right? I mean, now there's a fascinating study that came out recently, right? That people are talking about, and they've done this. They've done like neuroimaging and scan. And it was, I think, one of the guys. And I don't mean to go off track here, but it's important. You know, Zuckerberg is like the famous, you know, you see the social network. He's like the face of Facebook and whatnot. But you know, there was one of the other principal early on people behind Facebook, and he did this big interview recently. I think it was like a month ago, and he was like, yeah, we knew at that time like the emerging neuropsych literature that was coming out was telling us is that there's like hardwired reward systems with people, and if people feel that those like basic needs are being met, of like being liked and feeling important, it releases dopamine, and it's an addictive cycle. And they said, we've mapped it out, we've seen it, we know what it looks like. And so like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, they all operate on that principle. How many little hearts did you get? Right? How many retweets did you get? How many, you know, shares are you getting of this? And I mean, for us, we're all part of the system, right? It's like the Matrix in that way. It's the point is that you have to know what you're getting into and why you're doing it, right? Technology is a tool. The tool can what? The hammer can build, you know, like the blue mosque, you know, or the hammer can tear it down. It's a tool. It's about what you do with it. And it's about the intention behind what you're doing with it, right? But the point that I want to, that I was going off on is, you know, this is what we need to think about, like especially in this month, right? The month of Rabiul Awwal is reflect upon the life of the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, there's so many hadith. Maybe inshallah next week I'll come through with some of these hadith. I was just listening to one of my teachers, his podcast, right? And he was just on one of my drive back from break, and then he was talking about, he said, you know, the Prophet ﷺ told his Sahaba, this is a hadith that he's narrating and selling to he says, Allah Ta'ala told me that if I wanted, he could have made you've ever been to Makkah, you know the valleys of Makkah, the mountains of Makkah. He says, Allah Ta'ala told me that if I wanted, he could have made the mountains of Makkah and the valleys gold for me. But I told Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I told Jibreel to tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya Allah, I want to eat one day and I want to go hungry one day. I want to eat one day and go hungry one day. So that when I have your blessings, I thank you, and when I don't have your blessings, when I don't eat, then I am anticipating your blessings, and then I can be thankful for them. That's like such a beautiful example of having the option of having the pinnacle of dunya, and our Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who is a servant prophet, right? He's an abd of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's how he saw himself, is that he gave that up. Yes?
Can you briefly talk about the merits of Rabiul Awwal and like how we might benefit from this month?
Sure. So I don't know if you were here. I spoke about it really briefly in the beginning. It might have been right when you came in, but I'm happy to I mean, it's a beautiful topic. One should always recap these things. So we're in the month of Rabiul Awwal, and the three things that I would encourage you to do in this month. The three things, and they're all I want to make it as manageable for you as possible. The one is pick up a seerah. If you need recommendations, I'm happy to give you recommendations, but pick up a seerah and start it. Make the intention to try to finish it, but at least start reading it, because historically our teachers always taught us that this is a month where the ummah, meaning the awam, not even the scholars, the common people would reconnect themselves with the seerah by reading it or by hearing it, by listening to it in the masajid, in the khutbahs, in the halaqas, and kinds of like that. So this is the time that where you kind of dust it off in your heart, the negligence, and you come back to studying the seerah and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, right? That's number one. Number two is this is a month. Friday is a blessed day in which hadith of the Prophet ﷺ instruct us to increase our salah and nabi, or what we call durood sharif, saying peace and salutations on the Prophet ﷺ, is that this is a month in which we should all, inshallah, try to increase that, because a good habit you build now will, inshallah, last you, right? There's a beautiful hadith in which one of the companions came. He said, Ya Rasulullah, look at how much they love their teacher, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He said, Ya Rasulullah, I want to send peace and blessings and salutations upon you. And he had a wird, he had a certain litany that he did, right? Of whatever, it was an X amount. And he said, if I do, I forget the exact wording of the hadith, but let's say a fraction, let's say a quarter. If I do a quarter out of my wird, I have do just for, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, or any formula thereof, right? He said, in addition to all of the other dhikr, subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, as part of his wird. You get the point. He said, the Prophet was happy. He said, that's good. If you do more, it's better. He said, he said, Ya Rasulullah, if I do half of my wird and my du'as, if I devote half of them to doing peace and salutations and blessings upon you, and the other half, my other dhikr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how is that? He said, that's good. And if you do more, it's better. And then the Sahabi said, and I forget the exact fractions here talked about, but let's just say, he said, Ya Rasul, what if I do 3/4? Majority of it. He said, that's good, mashallah. If you do more, it's better for you. And then he sat and thought, and he came back and said, Ya Rasulullah, my heart has such muhabba for you, such love for you. Ya Rasulullah, I want to do all my time that I've allocated to do my dhikr, to do my wird, I want to make all of that for durood sharif, for salah and nabi, peace and salutations upon you. And the Prophet said, this is wonderful, inshallah, this will be khair for you, it's good for you, right? I'm paraphrasing the hadith. But that's how, the connection they had with him, that they would ask him, and this is the jawab, the answer he gave. Why am I mentioning that? It comes back to the point that this month is to increase your salutations and your salah and nabi and your durood sharif, and you'll find, inshallah, the benefit from this. This is a time-tested thing, I'll tell you right now. It's very apropos, given the fact that we're going into exams. Our scholars for literally 1,400 years have written about this, and have narrated this from true incidents. If you're ever in a situation and you're feeling stressed and anxious, recite, just make your tongue moist with the peace and salutations upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Do it with ikhlas, inshallah your anxieties and stress will diminish. Maybe it's very relevant of us going into reading week and exams and papers being due. And I heard this from my own teacher, right? I was really stressed about something. He says, increase your durood sharif that you're reading. And alhamdulillah, thumma alhamdulillah, I had, in fact, this is 20 years ago. In fact, it was 23 years ago. I was a 17-year-old freshman in college when he told this to me, when I asked him about it. Alhamdulillah, I can only tell you from my lived experience is that it's beyond wonders, is working wonders is an understatement here, right? And this is a secret that our ulama and our mashayikh and awliya have passed down to us. And this is the month in which you can reignite that. The last thing that I'll say, because I said 3 things, right? The last thing that I would encourage you in the month of Rabiul Awwal to do is pick one sunnah. Pick one sunnah in this month that you want to revive in your life and that you want to inculcate. And mashallah, you have so many to choose from. And if people want examples, at the end I can give you some examples, right? Of very simple but very powerful things that you and I can need to revive in our life, right? Before I continue, because I'm looking at the time, I'll say one last thing, and I hope that answers your question, right? One last thing about this. The Prophet said that someone who revives my sunnah, right? And revives my sunnah and then has istiqamah, has steadfastness upon it, and does that. This is one sunnah, new sunnah that you're bringing into your life, and you have istiqamah, you're steadfast, it becomes a regular habit and practice of your life. The rewards of that are tremendous. But think even beyond that. If when in the community, the khair, the benefit from that is other people see it, and 1 or 2 or 3 or however many people are inspired right, by starting that. It's like a domino effect. Are inspired and motivated by that sunnah that you've inculcated in your life, inshallah, all of the reward of their practice upon that sunnah, the reviving of that will go to this person. Right? I mean, think exponentially. Think of the power of that in your life. Right? And there's like literally, like I said, we could talk, for the rest of the halaqah about the different sunnahs that one could revive. But I encourage you, we've talked about so many in our series right now. So there are 3 things. Pick up a book of Seerah, inshallah. Increase your Salah and Nabi. And it can be a short, one shouldn't be daunted or overwhelmed by what I'm saying. The point is it should be practical and effective, like something that you can start tonight, inshallah. And then also start performing another sunnah in your life, inshallah. I hope that helps answer your question. Now, moving on. The Prophet ﷺ says when one of you eats, he should not wipe his fingers until he licks them first. It's a sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that when he would sit and eat, and I think we talked about this last week, but I'll just mention it now. There's barakah in eating together. Obviously, the nature of our lives is sometimes you have to eat alone. That's fine. I understand that. But there is barakah in when you eat with people. And so it's good to encourage, ideally, to go out to eat with your friends and, ideally, invite people to your house, right? And host them. Right? Think of all the ajr and thawab, all the rewards and blessings you get, right? From inviting people and feeding them in your house. And then, we talked about last week, I'm just recapping here about, make dua, make dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you're preparing the food. That rahmah, right? That mercy, that muhabba, that love, inshallah, will go into the food. There'll be barakah on that food. And when you feed it to people. That's why when you read the stories, by the way, I don't remember the story right now. I don't want to get the details wrong. Inshallah, I'll remember for next week. But that's the famous story about when Imam Shafi ate with Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, right? I forget which one of the Imams, but one of the, I don't want to get the names wrong, but there was 3 major points in that happened, right? One of the famous Imams goes to the house of the other Imam because he invited him over, and his young daughter is the narrator of this, which is fascinating, right? She says, my father invited the Sheikh over to our house, like the Sheikh al-Mashayikh, right? The Sheikh of the time, one of the Mujtahid Imams. And he says he came. He says, I noticed that, and 3 things happened, and the daughter narrates them. I'm rusty, I don't want to get it wrong, but the last one is, she says, when I saw that my father put the food in front of him, the food that was presented to the sheikh, he ate everything on the plate, right? Whereas normally, right, someone gives you food, you don't want to be gluttonous, you eat a little, etc., etc. And then she said to her young daughter, think of how precocious and astute these children were. You have grown students, we have 20-year-olds that this would be lost on them, right? To observe the barakah in situations. And she's an 8-year-old, Allahu Alam, year-old girl sitting in this. She says, I watched. And she says, Baba, the man ate all the food. I thought you said he was a righteous man. Righteous people don't eat to their fill. And so what happens is then the next day or a time thereafter, they were friends. It wasn't that takalluf between them. They had that relationship of muhabba, of love. He says, my daughter was just wondering why you ate all the food. He says, Sheikh, when I came to your house and I saw the barakah that Allah Ta'ala put in your food, because the fact that your family prepared this with love and mercy, the barakah that was in your food, I could see it coming down, into the plate. That's why I ate it all up. I said, I don't want to lose this opportunity. This is reality. This is a part of our history. There's people like that still today, that when they prepare the food, it has that muhabba, has that love, and the dhikr that they do when they prepare it, and you eat it, and you feel physically well, right? Physically and spiritually versus not. What I mean to say is, this is a simple thing. Invite people over, and there's more blessings when you eat together. And when you eat together, the sunnah is, and I encourage you to try this in your home, is that you sit down, lay down, let's say a tablecloth on the floor, you sit down around each other, you eat from one plate, or you have several dishes. And so I'm just going to talk about some of the adab, because we have a little bit of time left. It's very important. I know you know this stuff. I know your parents taught you this in your house. All I'm simply doing is refreshing it for myself and for yourself, right? Is that you're the host, right? Obviously the host brings out the food for the guests. The adab of the guests is the guests wait until all the food has come out from the kitchen, has been served, right? The host should not eat before the guest. They should come and then encourage the guests to eat together, and then they start saying Bismillah and they're eating together. So the guest doesn't want to preempt the host by start eating, right? No matter how hungry you are, it's out of the adab of the situation, right?